Hello and welcome to the show. This is the Sales for the Nigerian Business Person podcast. It's available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple iTunes, or any podcast player of your choice. So subscribe for free once you're done listening to this episode, just in case you're using your web browser to listen. Today on the show, we have audio recordings from the WhatsApp School of Business program that I advertised on Saturday, the 15th of July 2023. The goal of the program was to introduce folks to the fundamentals of doing business in Nigeria and to show how sales and business development principles can help you overcome the harsh landscape of doing business in our dearly beloved country. I also wanted to answer general business questions posed by the participants, and the program was delivered entirely over WhatsApp for the course of more than 1 week. And this is an example of how you can get truly convenient business education in your pocket and learning over WhatsApp at your convenience. If you love what you hear on the podcast and you like daily access to me, to ask me questions related on how to sell in your business, then the WhatsApp Coaching Club is now open, and the investment required for that is only 5,000 Naira a month. You ask me anything, I give you answers and assignments to move your business forward. So if you're interested, hit me up on the socials. Don't worry about how to spell my name. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn, and my name, Tabashima Ayede, is the correct spelling. You can find it in the web browser where you're currently listening to this episode. You see the spelling of my name, the email address, and the photo, and it's also in the profile of the podcast app where you're currently listening to my voice. So Tavashima Ayede, the correct spelling of the name, is there. So if you're interested in the 5K, the WhatsApp Coaching Club, the 5K monthly investment, then let me know. Hit me up, send me a message on 080 6466 2140. The country code for Nigeria is +234. And for those of you who are trying to save to start a business, I'm affiliated with a reputable financial institution in Nigeria that has 504 billion naira in assets. And what that means is they're not going to go broke anytime soon. They're a secure organization to work with. They're not going to run away with your money anytime soon. They're in the business of protecting and guaranteeing your savings. This is not a bank, so you're not going to have an ATM card. You're not going to get hit by lots of miscellaneous fees. And you're going to get an interesting, or rather, you're going to get an improvement on the interest that you get from regular savings banks in Nigeria. And then, of course, this is safer than using loan sharks for the capital to start your business, because loan sharks are going to want to embarrass you and your whole family, and they want you to put your father and your mother up as credit. Sorry, not credit. What's that word? As collateral for the loan. So if you're interested, then hit me up on 080 6466 2140 to get started on saving towards your dream. Now remember, it doesn't have to be saving towards a business. Any savings plan will do. People have saved with this organization for their children's education. Let's say, like me, you have kids in primary school and you're wondering about secondary school and the all-expensive university education. And then, of course, folks like my mom saving towards retirement. So if you're interested, hit me up and let's get you started. Now, on with the episode for today. Hello and welcome to day 3. Before we continue, I'd like to apologize because there's some, industrial work, construction work going on outside my recording space. So some of that noise might bleed into the recording every now and then. I guess the responsible thing to have done would have been to wait and then record at a quieter time. But the thing is, it's already past 10 o'clock. I have no idea when all this is going to be done. So I might as well just get on with it so I don't keep you guys waiting. Especially for the people who happen to join the group today. And I'm sure they must be anxious to catch up with all the stuff that we've been onto and what the audio resource for today is. So again, I'm your host, Tavashima Ayede. I'm a sales coach and a business consultant, and welcome to day 3. Today on day 3, we're going to look at the second challenge of doing business in Nigeria, and we're going to lump corruption and bureaucracy and certifications all into one. I know that they're separate things, but just to make sure that we move things along fast, and also especially since in these sorts of climates, we often face the effects of these things head on and one and the same. I might as well just put them together under one heading. So, like I pointed out, yes, corruption and bureaucracy are not the same thing, because corruption is the abuse of power for personal gain. When we talk about corruption in this case, we're limiting it to the context of politics. So when leaders abuse power for personal gain, that's corruption. While bureaucracy, on the other hand, is over concentration of decision making at the top. Now, it just so happens that in places like Nigeria, where we're still grappling with the fullest implications of the rule of law, it often happens that corrupt people often sit on top bureaucracies, and they're able to use these bottlenecks for their own personal gain. So that's why in the Nigerian context, it feels as if both of them are the same, but actually they are different. So, abuse of power for personal gain, which is corruption, it comes about because, like I said, we have a failure of rule of law in Nigeria. Well, maybe not the failure per se, because we have everyday folks like you and I who are listening who obey the law, and the average Nigerian does do their best to be law abiding. But we are yet to build credible, sustainable, independent, long-term institutions. And so, because of that, we have those situations where private actors like me, in certain situations, I can muscle along, use my status, use my stature, use my strength, use my position in society or whatever to get what I want. And then that kind of behavior continues all the way up the food chain, up until the highest office in the land. So the perils are there for corruption by everybody. So until we have sustainable, independent, long-term, credible institutions, this is something that is going to keep happening. And those are the only conditions under which we're going to have the rule of law. Now, yes, some political actors say there's no such thing as absolute rule of law, that whether you're looking at Russia or looking at America or Australia, you are going to see shortcomings in how societies and governments apply the rule of law. And well, yes, that's the case. We're human, so there's not going to be any kind of perfection on this side of the veil. So, but still doesn't mean that there's an ideal that we have to aim towards. So what are the effects of corruption for everyday business folks? We feel it because there's bribery. When we want to get our permits, when we have to do business, there are people that want bribes, there are people that want kickbacks. So it's not just when you're dealing with government officials, because even dealing with people one-on-one, you're trying to negotiate. Let's say you want to supply toilet tissue and soap supplies to hotels in Abuja or in Lagos. It's not out of the ordinary to find that, yes, you're talking to the manager, but maybe the manager's PA or maybe the person who manages the store or somebody like that wants you to offer them a bribe or to grease their palm or something like that. So it's not just when you're doing business with government. So bribery, that's one way that we business people feel the brunt of corruption. Then there's also embezzlement. For those of you who have had staff run away with your because there are some businesses where they need to have inventory and they need to have equipment. So for wedding planners, for instance, remember I started off in the wedding space about 15 years ago as a wedding photographer in Lagos, and then later on moved to Abuja. So in the wedding space, wedding planners, wedding decorators, those sorts of people, usually they like to own their own trucks. Maybe not many trucks, but at least one small truck that you can use to haul things around, tables, chairs, flowers, transport stuff like that. So it's not common, but once in a while you do hear of that kind of story, that somebody took the staff bus and you never heard from the person again, or the person took the staff bus and somebody else found the person using the staff bus to for private business or something like that, or somebody who is in charge of managing client deposits happens to take some of the money because they feel like, oh, they were in a bad spot, so they needed the money for something. So these sorts of things happen, and unfortunately, it seems to be a normal part of business occurrence here in Nigeria that folks are going to embezzle. Of course, the solutions are obvious for this particular one when it comes to your business organization, business management, things like that. But we're going to deal with the solutions later on, not in these summary episodes. Then there's also nepotism, and that is when people try to favor their relatives or close associates. It's hard to call nepotism when it comes to business, because who says that if I build a successful business, who says that I can't bring my son in to work in the organization and to take the reins after me? So when it comes to private enterprise, it's a little more difficult to call this one out. But then when we're dealing with public state of affairs, it's easy to call out. So because the president has 3 or 4 sons, doesn't mean he should line up his first son to head this parastatal or head this or head that. And there are some people who raise those sorts of questions when Donald Trump was in power in America. At the time of this recording, this is July 2023, and while Donald Trump was in office, I don't have the facts before me, but I think his daughter was involved in government in some way, and I think one of his sons was involved in government in another way, and some folks just thought, look, dudes, this cries of nepotism. Then there's also the extortions, the extortion that happens when you go to government parastatals, or you're just trying to do business generally. So you're trying to bring in your cars. Let's say what you do is you sell previously used cars in Nigeria, because that's a big business here in Nigeria. There's a secondary market for cars. People go abroad to America, they buy these Toyota Corollas or Mercedes-Benz Jeeps or whatever, and they import them and then bring them to sell them here. And so you get extorted by customs officials, or security operatives, and well, unfortunately, these sorts of things happen. Now, bureaucracy, on the other hand, is like I said earlier, over concentration of decision making at the top. So that means everything has to flow to the organ at the top, as we like to say in this part of the world. And the organ at the top basically is the person who is the chief executive, the chief presider, the whatever term that it is you're going to use. So basically everything stops at that person's table, and it's something that happens notoriously in some countries, but I think in Nigeria we have a pretty bad case of bureaucracy. Now, if you think that these things are just abstract and not problems for those of us who are business owners or self-employed, let's run through a couple of examples. So, remember, I started off about 15 years ago as a wedding photographer. To start off in the wedding photography space, there's not much corruption involved, not much bureaucracy involved. Okay, well, in fact, there might be some corruption involved, because you have to get a brand new camera, and let's say you don't want to buy the cameras available here. Let's say you've been able to get some money from your mom, your pops, or your rich uncle, and you want to import your camera. So the problem might arise when your what are they called? The people who handle the shipping agents. I can't remember the proper name. So the thing might get to the port, and then your shipping agent calls you up and say, "Hey, dude, everything is here, but we have a problem." And you're like, "Okay, what's the problem?" And he says, "Well, the things are in Lagos, they're in the port, but the customs officials are saying that we can't let it go. We can't clear them. You have questions to answer. So can you please show up? Let's see how we can get this done." And then unfortunately you get there, and maybe you might have to grease 1 or 2 palms or things like that. So let's say their query is that you bought the camera, but then you also bought a drone, but then drones have to be licensed to be used in certain kinds of airspaces, and you might get there to make the argument that, well, yes, that's the case, but only if you're flying over an airport, and then you now have to apply to FAAN. I think FAAN, yeah, that's the Federal Airports and Aviation Authority or something like that. So, but bottom line is, you argue, you do those arguments back and forth, and then you understand what's going on. Then you call the guy aside and say, "Look, bruh, I know what's happening here. So, how far? What can we do? I mean, how can we make this thing go away? I'm a wedding photographer. I just want to do my business. So, I beg, what can we do? I beg, what can we do? Let's make this thing move along." So you can see that as a wedding photographer, you might be faced with this sort of thing. Now, when you're done with all that and it comes to filing your taxes, assuming that you want to be law-abiding and do things all the way, and that's a problem that I faced. I was assigned a tax office that was really far from where I was, and it made things really inconvenient when it came to filing my taxes, because I wasn't going to do it myself. I had an accountant. The accountant was going to have to drive out of town. Now, there was a process at the time for getting your tax office. For those of you who are here in the group or who might be listening to this who know about tax intricacies, forgive me if I used the wrong term. But there's something that you could do to get your tax, gosh, I can't remember what the name was, to get your tax whatever reassigned. But it was a whole process in itself, and at the end of the day, it was just easier for my account guy to just drive out of town and get this thing done rather than facing the hassle of getting the tax office reassigned to something that was much closer, which was actually about 20 minutes away from where we both were, because we were both in the central business district in Abuja at the time. So these are examples about how corruption and bureaucracy make things difficult for the wedding photographer. For those of you who are in export, I have been involved in export, family export business, me, my brother, and my mom, where we try to export charcoal and some commodity products. And these were some of the difficulties that we would face. Change in shipping times, no accountability. Basically, whatever happens at the ports, whatever happens, happens. And they just tell you have to deal with the fallout, and you're the one who's bearing all the costs. All the costs by yourself. There are problems with bureaucracy. Decisions would be made at the top. The rules would change overnight, and we were left trying to just grapple with the change. An example is how at the time you could export charcoal to other countries like the Middle East, for instance. Although there are some environmentalists who say that it's bad for the planet because you're cutting down trees in Nigeria and you're leading to deforestation. You're leading to deforestation in Nigeria, and so some people are trying to battle that. And so it would happen sometimes that overnight there will be a new set of procedures that you'd have to comply with. You would have to go to the Ministry of, is it Trade? There's a ministry in Abuja, I can't remember, but the ministry is in, it's not far from the, okay, well, I doubt that you guys know the layout of Abuja. But all of a sudden, there will be a new regulation. You'd have to go all the way to the ministry in Abuja to get more permits and to get physical inspections to be sure which kind of tree you cut down for the process. And the whole thing could take about 3 weeks if everything worked correctly. But of course, it wasn't going to work correctly all the time. So you'd have to talk to someone and try and facilitate things to move along, if you catch my drift. If you read between the lines, you understand what it is that I'm trying to say. So that was the process. And then that process would last for a while. And then overnight, the process would be gone again. And you could just go ahead and export your charcoal like that. So there was one instance where we got caught in all that and we weren't able to facilitate one trade because at the time we started the trade, this process was no longer in place. By the time we were fulfilling the order, this process was now fully in ground. And by the time we mobilized to get things done, somehow the restriction was now gone after we had spent time and money, and now we could go ahead and trade. So these things do happen. Luckily, I'm based in Abuja, so I was the one who was available to go to the ministry and try and get these things sorted out. So you can see that corruption, bureaucracy, it affects people who are in the export business. For those of us who are consultants and who want to work in the public sector and improve the public sector, these things also affect us as well. Because I was in partnership with another guy who wanted to do some training for the police. I can't remember what the nature of the training was, but then this is a bureaucracy. So everything, concentration of decision making rests at the top. So we couldn't just deal with the underlings at the office. We had to keep moving higher and higher and higher. And eventually it went past the office of the IG. And at some point, the person was in talks with the first lady. That's the wife of the president. I'm not going to say which president that was. Because apparently for contracts of this size and for this kind of things, the presidency had to okay this sort of thing. And I thought this is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm sure you do too. Because the president has, the presidency, running a country is a huge job. Why would approving certain kinds of contracts, especially something like this, public sector issues for the training of police personnel, why would it have to fall on his table? But it happens. We see it on the news. day in and day out. You say the Federal Executive Council, that's the President and the Council of Ministers, the President, the Vice President, Ministers. I'm not sure if it includes former heads of state. They sat to deliberate and approve this contract, approve that contract, approve that contract. And it just blows my mind. Like, why should the presidency and why should the Federal Executive Council be approving contracts? They should be much more responsible for macroeconomic stuff, trying to make sure that policy works right, so that the right decisions can be made, and not saying approve contract A, don't approve contract B, approve contract C, do not approve contract D. So, for those people in the consulting and the training space, if you want to reinvigorate the public sector, these are some of the challenges that you're going to face. And it's the same for people in catering, hospitality. You make cakes, you cook rice, it's the same thing. There are lots of certifications that you need to get. And yes, it makes sense. So, excuse me. It makes sense that if you bake cakes, it makes sense that you should use the right kind of water and that there's no saccharin. I think it's called saccharin or something like that. There's a dangerous substitute that people use for sugar that human beings should not be eating. So, to make sure that all these harmful chemicals are not there. So, yes, it's good that those rules are in place. Sorry, forgive me. But then, trying to get the all these permits, you're dealing with a lot of bureaucracy. You can't just walk into the nearest local government office. In Abuja, it's called AMAC, the Abuja Municipal Area Council. Oh, sorry, for those of you who are foreigners listening, Abuja is the Federal Capital Territory. It's the capital of Nigeria. It's the Washington, D.C. of Nigeria, if we put it that way. So you can't just walk into the office, meet a clerk, and get sorted out. You go, but the chairman is not on seat, and then you have to come back. And that thing really blows my mind. If I want a permit because I want to bake cakes and I want somebody to come and certify that the water that we use in our facility is clean, I shouldn't have to wait until the chairman is on seat before we get that done. There should be some other officer, no matter how highly or lowly, whose job it is to take care of these sorts of things. But you would come, and for certain things, you can't get it done because the chairman is not around. I remember once I had to pay a penalty as a wedding photographer, something about signage for my studio. I hadn't paid for signage. And it took me 3 days to pay because I would come and the chairman was not around. And I'd call, chairman is around, I'd get there and he's not on seat. And it took me 3 days to pay. And it's absolutely mind-boggling that even to pay certain kinds of penalties, you can't pay unless the top dog, unless the whoever it is on seat. So it affects people even in the entertainment and the hospitality space. So corruption, bureaucracy, these things are big problems across different kinds of businesses. So the assignment for today, take your paper and your pen and brainstorm how these problems affect your own particular business, because I doubt that I have exhausted the number of businesses that might be affected and the different ways that they could be affected. So let's map out the problems affecting how it affects your own particular business. You're trying to write out questions that you're going to need my help in solving in this regard. And remember, the end point is that towards the question and answer portion of the program, we are going to tease out answers in the conversations. And remember, the answers that we are going to tease out, or rather the principles that we're going to use, are principles of sales and business development. So we're using sales and business development perspectives to see how we can overcome these challenges of corruption and bureaucracy. If you haven't listened to the last audio resource, that's the one on infrastructure. I'm going to repeat it again. The reason why we're taking a business development perspective is because a lot of us business people have no responsibility over all these macroeconomic issues. I, Tavishima, cannot solve corruption on my own, and you, the person listening right now, cannot solve the problems of bureaucracy on your own. We only have control over certain things within our competency, within our sphere of influence, and so that's the reason why a sales and business development perspective is how we're going to look at it. Eventually, when I become the president, I can exercise some influence to see how we can sort some of these things out. And eventually, when you become the president or the minister in your state or whichever country you are, then you will have a very strong say in how things are done. But until then, we can only pay attention to things that are within our own area of control. The chat on the group here is still going to remain closed. I'm going to keep welcoming the new members in their private messages. So if you're listening to this and I haven't yet reached out to you, expect a message from me trying to find out some more about you, your area of business, challenges that you face, and what you hope to get out of the time that you spend over here on the group. So thank you very much for your time and attention. The chat is going to remain closed, like I said, and the next audio resource is going to be available shortly, where we look through another kind of challenge that we have in doing business here in Nigeria. But don't worry, we are not celebrating all the bad. That's not the whole point of these exercises. Is because at the end of the day, once we are done with the problem, after we've looked at the problem in some detail, we're going to come up with detailed solutions that you can apply in your own particular context. So thanks for listening. I'll catch you guys at the next session.